Hello everyone, this is a lesson for assignment 5 and we'll be modeling a small architectural piece. Um, so for this lesson I have a couple of things I want to show you. A lot of the stuff that you'll be doing are things that we've covered before, so there's not a lot of new stuff, but I wanted to show you a couple of things that are different and new that can hopefully help you complete the assignment and learn some um, interesting tricks and things you can do for modeling something like this. Although for your assignment, this will be a much smaller scope. So I definitely don't expect anything like this. Maybe even like something the size of this smaller half here. The assignment could be a small house. It could be a shack, a cabin. Um, it could even be, I don't know, a tiny home. Um, just something really small and architectural in nature, just to kind of like practice using multiple materials, tileable materials, and then kind of how to compose things together. So I brought this up in Sketchfab just because unfortunately I don't have immediate access to the source files. But I did want to kind of show you a little bit about how this was put together. So this is made of several different materials. So if I go to the modeling inspector, and I'll put a link to this um, in the I don't know, I guess description, or maybe I'll post it on Moodle so you can see like yourself if you want to do this. But so if I go to the modeling inspector and I look at the different um, chunks, you can see when I hover and click, things are different textures or materials. They're materials, but this is mostly just kind of like diffuse texture with a couple of exceptions. So over here, you can kind of see like this is the roof texture that I used for the top. Um, Let me turn on the wireframe. And if you turn on the wireframe, you can actually see how it goes outside of the texture because it's tiling, so it's repeating. And that goes for, you know, the walls and even like this brick road or this brick kind of like sidewalk. Um, so this is made of I don't know how many several materials, and I try to break it up into materials that kind of make sense. So for example, it makes sense to have kind of like the walls and everything separate, the roof separate, because you want those to repeat. For smaller stuff like the windows, I have like a window texture. So this is my window texture, and it's just an image where I collaged a couple of different windows on, and then I UV map parts of the window to this texture or to this material, to this texture, whatever you want to say. Um, and that way, you know, I have a couple windows, but they all use the same texture. So it's good to think that way and kind of like, you know, chunk things up. You don't want to have too many materials on your object. You know, it would make sense to have like one window and then have this empty space. So I kind of use it up with another window texture. Same thing with the door. So the door, I have a door texture. So there's the doors. And then if I have empty space, I'll put like some metal or some concrete there. And I'll just UV map different elements of the scene to the different parts of the texture. The main thing I wanted to kind of show off with this is how the walls are. So one thing about using repeatable textures that is sort of a limitation is detail. It's hard to get detail on it because it repeats. So if I already have this like kind of like chipped paint detail that you can see here, that would repeat around my entire model and it would just be everywhere and it would be too much. But I kind of wanted to control like where it was. So I have a version of the texture that has chip paint on it. And then I have a version that does not have chipped paint on it. Let's see if I can actually, yeah, this one. This one does not have chipped paint on it. So you can sort of UV map the model to the texture, and then you can like cut out a couple of polys and remap those to the version that has the chipped paint. And you can kind of control like where you want some of the detail. So it's just kind of not everywhere. Same thing with the bottom. Um, with like environmental pieces in particular, it's always good to have these kind of like natural seams. So you can see there's just like a little border. Let me go back out. Well, let me just show you this texture first. So yeah, so this is the plaster wall, but it has some grime on the bottom and it has that border. So what that does is it creates a natural seam with the, I guess, the sidewalk area, which is always good to do. It kind of makes your environments look a little better. It helps the elements stand out from each other. And then just using like the UV mapping to map the polys in different ways. So you can see for like the sidewalk, for example, you can see I have a poly here, and then one here, and then one here, but you can see how I lined it up on that seam right there so that it makes the transition look nicer. So we have them going this way, and then I did the seam right on the grout and then remapped this so it lined up. And then I did the same thing here, right on the grout, and then UV mapped it so it lined up. So then you get kind of a nice transition between the two. So it's always good to do stuff like that, just so everything looks nicer. So the roof is just the roof texture with it repeated onto it. I'm going to go back to the regular view, so I'm going to turn this off. Hold on, let me turn off the wireframe and then go to the full view. Oh, geez, hang on. Why is it model inspector, full view? Here we go. So for this, you can see a couple things that can really help your model stand out that do not add too much. Well, I wouldn't say too much, but it doesn't usually add overwhelming amount of detail. So the roof here, I decided if you look at the roof from like this angle, I decided to put a couple of lines in there, a couple edges, and then pull those up. That adds a lot of dimension to it, and it makes it stand out, especially if you look at it from an angle. You know, you get this nice sort of 3D look to it. I could have just kept it flat, but then you wouldn't get this really nice like 3D effect. You know, you can kind of get some 3D effects if you're using some advanced textures. I guess they're not really advanced, but things like normal maps or bump maps or height maps. But we're not quite there yet, and even those don't give you like the silhouette popping 3D detail that adding a couple of edges does. And it might look a little gratuitous, but honestly, it's only like, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This is probably another 10, 20, a little more than 20 or so lines. So when you make those lines and then make another one next to it like this to like pull it up, it's like an extra, what, like 40 polys, 40 tries, something like that. Maybe an extra 100 for these longer ones. And it's not that big a deal, and it adds a ton to how the model looks. I also added some extra stuff to like the silhouette. So like the edges of the roof, you can see if you look at this edge here, I added this little extra, see that? This extra like little lip here, just on the edge piece. Only the edge piece has this for silhouette. The rest of them are flat. You can see, if you look closely, you can see these are kind of flat here. But then the edges, just the edges have the little notches. And it's good to do things like that on the silhouette. So that way, you know, if this thing is rendered from this angle or from that angle, you get that nice 3D effect. It also creates nice shadows. Same thing with the top. So look at the top of the roof. The top of the roof has, it's not 100% perfectly straight. It has a little bit of, you know, chaos to it, a little bit of entropy to make it look more natural. And that's it. So, you know, doing a little architectural piece, maybe the size of just a small piece would be nice. And doing multiple textures. You can see there's some grime like here around the step to make it, you know, grime usually collects in edges and crevices. So I have some grime there. But yeah, so that's kind of like an overview. And there's several different materials on here. Most of it is UV mapped flat. So it's just kind of like flat and just put on the image. I didn't do a whole lot of unwrapping. I think the few things that are actually unwrapped are these satellite dishes are unwrapped, modeled and unwrapped uniquely. These toads obviously are modeled and unwrapped uniquely. And even like these details, like these like breaker boxes and air conditioners are not UV mapped. Those are, so if I click on them, yeah, so the air conditioner is just a flat image. I just mapped it to a flat image and just kind of like mapped the side. So this is the front and the side is just kind of mapped here, and that side's kind of mapped here. Um, so here's the breaker box and a couple other details. You can see here I kind of ran out of details to put on here. So it does have some empty space. Ideally, I probably would have combined this with the air conditioner texture, but for whatever reason I didn't. I think I had planned to put more elements here and I just kind of ran out of time. But yeah, so that's kind of like an overview. Hopefully that's helpful for you just to get like an idea. And then now let's move into a more practical kind of lesson. So I'll show you how to like accomplish some of those things really quick. So I'm going to make a cube and I'm just going to kind of move it up. So I'm just going to make something kind of random and map different elements to it and just kind of show you how that might look. So I'm just going to make like a long kind of rectangle deal. And maybe I will put an edge loop on top just to kind of simulate sort of like a roof kind of deal. All right, so now when you do this, remember this is not acceptable. This is demo quality. I want you to think about different details you can add to your piece that isn't just this. Okay, so first of all, let me show you just how you can do multiple materials on a piece. So I have this, I'm gonna click it. So I have a couple of textures that I grabbed really quick. One of them is siding, and I'll just type siding here. I like to name the materials what they are, because you're gonna have to pull them up again, and it's good to rename them so it's not just new material 1, new material 2, etc. And I'm just gonna go to base color, image texture, and open. And I have these prepared in the teaching folder. So siding. So here's siding. And I'm going to come here and go to turn on texture. And then I like matte cap because it has better shading. So now I have the siding on my model and it's very obviously not fit very well. So let's fix that. I'm just going to kind of make things easier for myself and just kind of finish off the square. And this will kind of make UV mapping a little easier for me. So that way you have a line that goes all the way around. So now I can kind of do this. So I have that selected. I'm going to delete. Sorry, this is a little chaotic here, but it's cool. So there we go. Select the sides. I want to delete the bottom. All right, so I have this siding on. So let's UV map it. I have, if you go to edit preferences and you go to add-ons and you search for UV, there's like a UV magic here that you can turn on, and that gives you access to a couple of different UV mapping tools. So if you go down to the bottom, it has UVW box. So I use this a lot. I don't know if you can see it in the video. Let me try again. It's like way down there. Yeah, you can kind of see it. So UVW box, and I use this a lot when I'm UV mapping. Let me go to this view and turn on texture. There we go. Okay. Yeah, so there it is. So I use this a lot when I'm doing, especially like environmental stuff, because what it does is it takes it and just kind of lays it out, as you can see, like flat, like a box, like you're unfolding a box, and it does a pretty decent job. And when you do it, you get these little settings you can open up. So this is the number. This is kind of like sort of like the size of the UV map. So if I do one, it kind of makes it like a 1-to-1 ratio. So this, I think this is, I don't really know how big this was when I made it, but if you do the two, it kind of makes it smaller. It makes the texture or the UV map smaller on the model. So if I go to two, you can see it kind of fits kind of nicely in there, right? Which looks pretty good. And then from here, you can sort of like, make adjustments as you see fit. Um, so yeah, so it's UV mapped on there. I have another material here, and I'll show you. This is sort of like what I was doing before. So I have a siding, a bare siding material, and this one has the same kind of wood siding, except there's no paint on it. And you can kind of use that to add some detail there. So right now the whole model has this material on it, but you can't assign individual polys to a different material. So let's say maybe there's like, I don't know, maybe at the top there's a couple of bare ones. Let's just kind of like do that. So I'm gonna make a cut that's like right on the edge of the material that makes sense. So I do this a lot where I'll kind of UV map it generally, and then I'll put cuts in kind of where things line up, and then you can sort of switch out the materials this way. So now let's say I select these two, go to bare, and then assign, and then we'll assign the bare siding to it. So now I have a couple of slats that don't have any paint on it. The only issue here is that these are not the same size, so it is off a little bit. So maybe in the UV editing, you can come in and you can kind of move them to maybe some areas like maybe down here where it lines up better. So if I move them down there and I go to layout, you can see it lines up a little better. So you can see how much of a organic kind of process it is to do this kind of thing. So I do that kind of stuff a lot for detail. Um, you could also do something like this. I could add another loop in there and kind of tuck it right into that shadow. And then maybe you could grab that edge and then kind of pull it out a tiny bit. So now you get that nice silhouette effect that I've done before. You can see. And that adds some nice dimensionality to it. Even that tiny little bit of silhouette makes a big difference right there. And it's just one edge, right? So you can do things like that. The problem with doing it that way is it does sort of interfere with the overall model a little bit. So when I pull it out, it kind of shifts this one. You can also do stuff like this where you could maybe grab this entire poly, shift D for duplicate. And what that does is it kind of duplicates that polygon. So let me just select it again. So shift D, X, and just kind of pull it out a tiny bit. And then maybe I can grab this top edge here and kind of pull it back in like that. And then I'll kind of pull it out for dramatic effect. I'll pull it kind of out kind of far. So now that comes out really far, right? And then if you want to add even some more like edges to it, you can. And then maybe you could pull like that out, maybe pull it down a little bit. So now you're adding like little details to give it some nice dimensionality. So you can see it looks kind of wobbly, like it's on there and it's kind of like warped and so on. So that's helpful. It does kind of leave this like open edge on the bottom. You could always select that edge and you can extrude it back like this into the model. So that way you have the kind of edge on the bottom. So those are different ways you can do things like this. So I could select the top. Let's put a new material here. So I'm gonna create a new material and call this shingles. And I have a shingles texture that I snagged. I can load up. open up and assign. So you can see, yeah, it doesn't fit. So let's get UV editing and let's do a box. That two's fine. Actually, let's do a one. We can see how it looks, and then let's rotate this. Oops, not that. This 90 degrees, and then now you got the shingles that are mapped nicely on top. So you can see this thing is kind of coming together with different sort of materials, and that's kind of it, right? So you just keep adding details and modeling from here, and that's kind of how it goes. I'm gonna delete this and show you some other stuff. So I have a cube, and let's make it, actually let's keep it like that, that's fine. And Y, Z, and just do one. And then I'm gonna do the same thing where I grab the sides and scale it to do like a brick wall. And then there we go. So this like short little brick, or not brick, concrete wall. It's gonna be concrete. So let's bring some more textures in. So if you're modeling these like separate elements like this, when you make the materials, they always exist in Blender. So I can come in here and you can see here's all my other materials I had. So remember that too. Like that's why you name them. So when you bring them in, you can always add them to your model that you've brought in before. So that's handy. I don't need that though, because I'm going to make a new one. So let's do concrete, dirty. UV editing. And let me just do the box map on that. Box map's usually a good place to start when you're doing stuff like this. And it looks pretty good. So I have the texture itself, you can see it here, has this nice like dirty bottom, which gives you sort of like those edges that I was talking about, those natural kind of seams or those natural outlines. The top looks kind of weird. So for the top, I might actually rotate that 90 degrees and then kind of move it up. And that looks better. So here also I have two textures, and I can kind of show you like how I might like break that up. So I have another one that has like damage on it. So if I wanted to do that, I might add some. So let's just add like a cut in there, and let's grab, or let's add the second material here. This is concrete damage. And open teaching damage. There we go. And I can show you what this looks like. So I'll assign the damage. So you can see it has some kind of like, you can see the brick underneath and the concrete's chipping away. So you can do stuff like that. You can add some nice texture variation to it. So you can see it's kind of everywhere. You can also use the knife tool, or use, actually, well, you could use the knife tool, but this is so like boxy. You could just kind of put another cut there, and then maybe you don't want this. So I'm going to change that one back, and then change that one back. So now you only have like the top and bottom assigned. This one has both. And you can sort of use this for, you know, a lot of different variation of how you might want to add some kind of random damage to your model. Let's see if happens if I put it there on top. Yeah. So you can see it's there on top. Maybe it doesn't make sense to like stop at the edge. So you can always select these two polys, go to UV editing, and slide those over. Let's see if we can watch it. Slide it over. Maybe something more like that might make more sense. Here's something you can do too. I could kind of like, let's do it kind of like that. But let's say I don't want the detail here. This is where the knife tool comes in. I don't know, this might look bad, but we can try it anyway. And we can kind of cut in a poly. So I'll do this from time to time. Now you have to be careful doing this because it can get kind of out of control. So you want to make sure that if you do start cutting in, that you feel comfortable doing so, because it does add some weird wireframe to your model. Like you can see how weird it is, but as long as you tie it into the edges, it should be okay. And I kind of do stuff like this as more of like a finishing sort of deal. But I can select like these polys here and then switch those back. And then now I have that detail. It is cut off a little sharply here, which I'm not a huge fan of. Is there a poly I can, I don't know. I do this sometimes. And then now maybe I could grab like this poly and then assign it to damage. So now it's a little kind of more organic looking. It doesn't look great from here, but if you're looking at a model from here, it still looks pretty good. So there's that. Again, that's kind of more of a finishing thing you might want to do toward the end because now I sort of disrupted the wireframe. So if I try to do a loop, I can't loop through it anymore. You can see it kind of stops there because the wireframe is a little messy. So even here, maybe you could do something and just a couple of clicks. I'm not going too crazy here. But just a couple clicks here and there, not too many polys. And that goes to the edge. So this I have to tie in. You always have to tie it in. And here you probably would want to tie these into each other. So, something kind of like this, just making sure you don't have any floating vertices, which can kind of be a pain. But anyway, so that can go there and there. Enter. And once you get it kind of all set in, so now you have like this kind of deal. Hold on, excuse me for a second. Okay. So now, if you have something like this, you can use it to create like a little edge. So let me just grab like this. I'll show you in a second. It's gonna get kind of crazy, but actually I might be making a mistake here. I'm not gonna do the edges. I'm gonna keep those flat. And then maybe kind of like, if you pull those outer in, yeah, that does not look good. Maybe don't do this. Or if you do, maybe just kind of outline the hole instead. This might be a better way to do it, actually. So a lot of times this is sort of trial and error. You can sort of like, hang on. See how I messed up? Make sure you actually select vertices, enter, 3. So now I have this. And then maybe if you extrude it in a tiny bit. Now that's better because now you do have the nice edge kind of cut into the texture. So I do that sometimes. Sometimes it turns out okay, sometimes it doesn't. But it is something to kind of practice. And you can always grab. So you do get this kind of stretched area, so you can always grab those. Good EV editing. Zoom in on that. Sometimes I'll just do a simple unwrap on it. So there it is over there. Rotate it. and then just kind of like fit it. Oops. Fit it inside of here. And that kind of helps map those areas here to the stretched ones. So yeah, you can do stuff like that. So just be careful doing these kind of like insets. These can get a little out of control. It's usually easier to do those like toward edges of like the bottom would be better. Um, because since it's on the bottom, you don't have to like kind of like worry about cutting it in as much. You can just kind of, do something more like that. And then you can get rid of like those kind of polys on the bottom. And then it's kind of more open-ended. So you get like this kind of stuff. Better like on the bottom than like in the middle. But yeah, if you wanna try it, then go for it. And I think that's it. So you can always make things separate, combine things. Um, use a couple different materials here if you need to. You can paint them, like I said last week, or you can make photo collage them, like I did for these. And so yeah, make a small architectural piece. It could be a garage, a shed, a shack, a small house, um, a cabin. Anything kind of small that can kind of help you practice using multiple materials and making a little architectural piece. So that's it for this video, and looking forward to see what you all come up with.